The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mahogany desk as I ran my microfiber cloth over its polished surface, careful not to disturb the leather blotter or the expensive fountain pen resting beside it. This penthouse was unlike any place I had ever cleaned before, all masculine elegance and understated wealth, from the floor to ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city skyline to the original artwork hanging on walls paneled in dark wood that probably cost more than I would earn in 10 years. My cleaning cart sat beside me, filled with the industrial strength supplies the agency required us to use, though this study hardly needed cleaning at all, as if its owner barely spent time here despite the personal touches that suggested otherwise. A chess set carved from what looked like ivory and ebony sat on a side table, frozen mid-game. Leather-bound books lined custom shelves, their spines cracked with actual reading rather than sitting pristine for show. The Persian rug beneath my feet was so thick and soft, I could feel it through my worn sneakers, its intricate patterns in deep reds and golds, probably hand-woven by artisans on the other side of the world. I had been working for Elite Home Services for 3 months now, taking whatever assignments they gave me because I needed every dollar I could scrape together, and this job paid triple my usual rate for reasons the dispatcher had not explained. The owner wanted his penthouse cleaned today specifically, she had said, and was willing to pay premium prices for discretion and efficiency. I had not asked questions because I could not afford to, not with my mother's medical bills piling up and the rent due in 5 days, and my other 2 jobs barely covering groceries. So here I was on a Friday afternoon, alone in a penthouse that screamed money and power, dusting furniture that cost more than my car, trying not to think about the life I might have had, if my father had not disappeared when I was 16, if my mother had not gotten sick, if I had been able to finish college instead of dropping out to work 3 jobs just to keep our heads above water. The first gunshot made me freeze, my cloth hovering over a crystal paperweight shaped like a pyramid. The sound was muffled but unmistakable, a sharp crack that echoed through the penthouse from somewhere beyond the study door. My heart lurched into my throat as my mind tried to process what I had just heard, tried to convince itself it was something else. A car backfiring outside, a door slamming, anything but what I knew it actually was. Then came another shot, and another, rapid pops that sent ice flooding through my veins as the reality crashed over me like a wave. Someone was shooting. Here. In this building. On this floor. The cloth slipped from my suddenly nerveless fingers as more gunfire erupted. No longer distant but right outside in the hallway, accompanied by shouting in a language I did not recognize, and the heavy thud of what sounded like bodies hitting walls. I dropped to the floor behind the desk on pure instinct, my knees hitting the expensive rug hard enough to send pain shooting up my thighs, my hands pressed over my mouth to stifle the scream building in my chest. My cleaning cart toppled as I scrambled for cover, sending bottles of furniture polish and glass cleaner rolling across the floor, their contents pooling on the Persian rug and spreading stains I would have cared about 5 seconds ago but now could not matter less. The gunfire intensified, so close now I could hear the brass casings hitting the marble floor of the hallway outside, could smell something acrid and chemical drifting under the door, could feel each shot like a physical blow to my chest as my heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I had never heard real gunfire before, had never been anywhere near violence like this, and the terror that gripped me was unlike anything I had ever experienced, pure and primal and paralyzing. My phone was in my jacket pocket hanging on my cleaning cart, but I could not make myself move to reach it. Could not make my body obey my mind's desperate commands to call 911, to do something, anything, because I was frozen in a crouch behind this desk with my hands clamped over my mouth and my eyes squeezed shut like a child who believed that if she could not see the danger, it could not see her. The study door exploded inward with a crash that made me scream into my palms, and I looked up to see a man striding through, tall and broad-shouldered, in dark slacks and a white dress shirt that was spattered with blood, his face all hard angles and cold fury, a gun held with practiced ease in his right hand. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with thick dark hair pushed back from his forehead and eyes the color of a winter storm, gray and intense, and utterly focused as they swept the room and landed on me huddled behind his desk like a terrified rabbit. For one suspended moment we stared at each other, his expression unreadable, mine surely showing every ounce of my terror. And then he was moving toward me with fluid grace that suggested violence barely leashed, his free hand reaching for my wrist before I could scramble away. His fingers closed around my arm, warm and strong and unbreakable, and he hauled me further behind the desk with a strength that made my own attempt at resistance laughable, positioning me in the corner where the desk met the wall, his body between me and the door. "What is your name?" he demanded, his voice low and controlled, despite the chaos I could still hear erupting in the hallway, despite the blood on his shirt, and the gun in his hand, and the cold fury radiating from him like heat from a furnace. His accent was subtle, Italian maybe, wrapping around the words and making even this terrifying moment somehow more intense. I could not make my mouth work, could not force words past the fear clogging my throat, could only stare up at him with wide eyes as my whole body trembled. He gave my wrist a small shake, not rough but insistent, commanding my attention. "Your name," he repeated, and this time it was not a request. "Am Maya," I finally managed to stammer, my voice thin and shaking. "I am just the maid. I do not know what is happening. I do not know anything. I should not be here. Please, I did not see anything." His eyes held mine, searching for something I did not understand, and I noticed details I had no business noticing in this moment, like the small scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the shadow of stubble along his sharp jaw, the way his pupils had dilated until only a thin ring of gray remained. "Maya," he said, my name sounding different in his mouth, more substantial somehow. "Listen to me very carefully. Stay behind this desk. Do not move until I come back. Do not make a sound. If anyone but me opens that door, you run for the window. Do you understand?" I shook my head frantically because I did not understand, could not understand why this was happening or who this man was, or why people were shooting in his hallway, or what he expected me to do if someone came through that door. The window was 40 stories up. There was nowhere to run. But he leaned closer, his hand still circling my wrist like a shackle, his face so close I could see the flecks of darker gray in his irises, could smell his cologne beneath the copper scent of blood, something expensive and masculine with notes of cedar and leather. "Do you understand?" he repeated, each word precisely enunciated, his voice dropping even lower. And I found myself nodding, even though I understood nothing except that this man expected obedience, and something in his tone made disobedience feel impossible. The gunfire in the hallway had slowed, fewer shots now but closer, accompanied by voices shouting in what sounded like Russian, angry and urgent. His jaw tightened as he listened, his body going even more still in that way predators do before they strike. And then he released my wrist and straightened to his full height, which had to be at least 6'3", making me feel small and fragile where I crouched against the wall. "Don't move until I come back," he said one final time, his storm gray eyes boring into mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. And then he was moving toward the door with that same liquid grace, his weapon raised, his focus shifting away from me and toward whatever waited beyond that doorway. He paused at the threshold, glanced back at me one last time, as if committing my face to memory. And then he was gone, pulling the door shut behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded as final as a gunshot. I heard the lock engage, heard his footsteps moving away down the hall, heard the gunfire resume with renewed intensity, and I was alone in the study with my heart trying to pound its way out of my chest and my whole body shaking so badly my teeth chattered. The late afternoon sun still streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting everything in warm golden light that felt obscene given what was happening just beyond that locked door. And I pressed myself into the corner where desk met wall, making myself as small as possible, my eyes fixed on that door, as I tried not to think about the blood on his shirt, or the cold efficiency with which he had moved, or the way he had looked at me like I was something that belonged to him now, something he had claimed with those simple commands. Don't move until I come back. The words echoed in my head, both promise and threat, and I realized with a terror that went bone deep that I had no choice but to obey, no choice but to wait in this beautiful masculine study surrounded by wealth I could never imagine, while violence I could not comprehend raged beyond the door. No choice but to trust that the dangerous man with storm-gray eyes and blood on his hands would return for me like he had promised. My cleaning supplies lay scattered across the Persian rug, glass cleaner mixing with furniture polish in a spreading puddle that would probably stain, and I found myself focusing on that small domestic disaster because it was something I could understand, something normal in a situation that had careened so far beyond normal I could not process it. The chess game sat frozen on its table, ivory and ebony pieces locked in eternal combat, and I wondered if the man who had locked me in here ever finished his games, or if he left them perpetually unresolved, always one move away from checkmate. The gunfire stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise had been, thick and oppressive and filled with terrible possibility, and I held my breath without meaning to, straining to hear anything beyond the thundering of my own pulse in my ears. Seconds stretched into minutes that felt like hours, and I stayed frozen behind that desk, my back pressed against the wall, my eyes locked on that door, waiting for it to open and reveal whether salvation or damnation stood on the other side. Don't move until I come back. He had said it 3 times, each repetition driving the command deeper, and I found I could not have moved even if I wanted to, could not have made myself stand and run for that window 40 stories above the city streets, could not have done anything but wait and hope and pray that when that door opened again, it would be him and not whoever he had been fighting in that hallway. My wrist still tingled where his fingers had gripped it, warm and unbreakable and strangely careful despite his obvious capacity for violence, and I rubbed at the spot absently, trying to erase the sensation and knowing even as I did that it was already burned into my memory along with everything else about this impossible afternoon. The man with the storm-gray eyes who had locked me in his study with a command and a promise. The man whose name I did not know but whose face I knew I would see every time I closed my eyes. The man who had looked at me like I was already his. The silence was worse than the gunfire had been, pressing against my eardrums like water at depth, and I counted my heartbeats because it gave me something to focus on besides the terror clawing at my insides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, each pulse of blood through my veins marking another second of this nightmare, another moment trapped behind this desk in a study that had transformed from a workplace into a prison. 15 minutes passed, though it felt like hours, days, an entire lifetime compressed into the space between one breath and the next as I waited for something to happen, for the door to open, for more gunfire to erupt, for anything to break this awful, suffocating quiet. My legs had gone numb from crouching in the same position. My back ached from pressing against the wall, and my hands were still shaking no matter how hard I tried to steady them, adrenaline flooding my system with nowhere to go, leaving me jittery and sick and desperately needing to move. Don't move until I come back, he had said. But how long was I supposed to wait? And what if he didn't come back at all? What if he was lying dead in that hallway with whoever had been shooting at him? What if I was locked in here until someone found me, or I died of thirst or fear, whichever came first? The thought made my breathing quicken, made my chest tighten with the beginning of panic, and I forced myself to slow down, to breathe in through my nose and out through my mouth, like I had learned in the yoga class I had taken exactly twice before deciding I couldn't afford the membership. The city spread out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, oblivious to the violence that had just occurred 40 stories above its streets. Cars moving along distant roads like ants, People going about their normal Friday afternoons, shopping and working and living their lives while I huddled behind a desk wondering if I was going to die. The normalcy of it felt obscene, felt wrong, and I tore my gaze away from the window because looking at that ordinary world made this situation feel even more surreal, even more impossible to process. My cleaning cart lay on its side where I had knocked it over, bottles scattered across the Persian rug, and I focused on that instead, on the spreading stain where furniture polish had soaked into fibers that probably cost thousands of dollars per square foot, and I thought about how I would have to pay for the damage, how the cleaning service would dock my wages, how I couldn't afford to lose this job, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to run and never look back. Curiosity finally overcame fear, or maybe it was just the desperate need to do something, anything, to break the paralysis that had locked my muscles tight. I shifted slightly, wincing at the pins and needles shooting through my legs, and peered around the edge of the desk toward the door. The late afternoon light still streamed through the windows, painting everything in warm gold, and I could see the crack beneath the door, maybe half an inch of space between the bottom of the heavy wood and the marble floor of the hallway beyond. At first I saw nothing but shadow, but as my eyes adjusted, I made out shapes that made my stomach clench with fresh terror. Boots, expensive leather boots in black, attached to legs that weren't moving, bodies lying in the hallway just beyond this door, and beneath them a dark liquid spreading slowly across the marble, creeping toward the threshold, and I knew with sick certainty that it was blood. I scrambled backward so fast I slammed into the wall behind me, my hand flying up to cover my mouth, bile rising in my throat as my mind tried to reject what I had just seen. There were bodies in the hallway. Dead bodies. The man with storm gray eyes had killed them, or they had killed each other, or something had happened that resulted in corpses lying just feet away from where I crouched. And suddenly, this beautiful study felt like a tomb, the air too thick to breathe, the walls too close, everything tilting and spinning as panic clawed its way up my spine. I jerked away from the wall, needing space, needing air, and my shoulder caught the edge of the small table beside the desk, the one holding the chess set I had admired earlier. The table rocked, the chess pieces tumbled, and I lunged to catch them before they fell, my hands closing on empty air as ivory and ebony scattered across the desk's polished surface. One of the pieces, the Black King, rolled off the far edge, and I heard it hit something with a soft click that sounded too mechanical, too deliberate, and then a section of the desk's side panel swung inward with a whisper of perfectly oiled hinges. I froze, my hand still outstretched, my eyes locked on the opening that had appeared in what had seemed like solid mahogany. The hidden compartment was maybe 2 feet wide and a foot deep, and it was filled with monitors, small screens built into the wood, each one showing a different view of the penthouse in crisp, high definition. My breath caught as I leaned closer despite every survival instinct screaming at me to leave it alone, to close whatever I had opened, to forget I had seen anything. The monitors showed empty rooms, hallways, a kitchen with gleaming stainless steel appliances, a living area with furniture that probably cost more than my entire apartment building, and then my eyes landed on one screen labeled East Study Cam, and I saw myself, a small figure huddled beside a desk, face pale and eyes wide with fear, hair escaping from my ponytail in messy strands. He had been watching me. This whole time, before the shooting started, while I had been cleaning his study and thinking I was alone, he had been watching me on these monitors from somewhere else in this penthouse. The realization sent ice through my veins, made my skin crawl with the violation of it, made me feel exposed and vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the violence still fresh in my memory. I wanted to look away from the screens, but I couldn't, my eyes drawn to the other monitors, searching them, and then I found him. The man with storm gray eyes was moving through what looked like a bedroom, his white shirt stained with blood, the gun still in his hand, his movements controlled and precise as he checked behind doors and inside a closet. He was alone, and he was methodical about his search, efficient in a way that spoke of training and experience, and I watched as he crossed to the bedroom door and disappeared from that screen, only to appear moments later on a different monitor showing a hallway. The hallway where the bodies were. I watched him step over the corpses without even glancing down, his focus on the rooms ahead, and I counted 3 bodies, no 4, sprawled in positions that spoke of sudden violent death. He checked each room he passed, the gun leading, his body angled in a way that minimized his profile, and I realized I was watching someone who knew how to kill, who had done it before, who moved through the aftermath of violence like other people moved through their morning routines. Then he stepped into a room I didn't recognize, some kind of office or secondary study, and I watched him approach a man I hadn't noticed before. Someone still alive, hands raised, backing away, mouth moving in words I couldn't hear. The man with storm-gray eyes didn't hesitate, didn't stop to talk or negotiate or do anything except raise his weapon and fire twice, center mass, professional and cold, and the other man dropped like a puppet with cut strings. I jerked back from the monitors, my hand over my mouth again, stomach heaving, because watching someone die on a screen was different from hearing gunfire through a door, was immediate and visceral and horrible in a way that made every cell in my body scream. He had just killed someone. Not in self-defense, not in the heat of battle, but in cold blood, executed him like it was nothing, like taking a life was just another task to check off his list. "Oh God," I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." And I knew I had to close this compartment, had to hide what I had seen, had to pretend I had stayed frozen behind this desk like he had ordered. My hands fumbled at the panel, trying to push it closed, but it wouldn't budge, wouldn't slide back into place no matter how hard I shoved. There had to be a release mechanism, something I had triggered when the chess piece fell, but I couldn't find it, couldn't make my shaking hands work properly, as panic made my movements clumsy and desperate. "Close," I begged, my voice barely a whisper. "Please close." But the panel stayed stubbornly open, the monitors still glowing, still showing me things I had no business seeing. On one screen, the man with storm-gray eyes was moving again, heading back toward the hallway, heading back toward this room, and I could hear footsteps now, real footsteps in the actual hallway beyond the door, steady and unhurried, and I knew with absolute certainty that he was coming back. I attacked the panel with renewed desperation, my fingers searching for buttons or latches or anything that would make it close, sweat beading on my forehead despite the climate-controlled air. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and I heard the lock click, heard the door handle turn, and I was out of time. The door swung open and he stood there in the threshold, taking in the scene with those storm-gray eyes, and I watched his gaze move from me to the open compartment, to the scattered chess pieces, to my guilty, terrified expression, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I told you not to move," he said, his voice quiet and controlled in a way that was somehow more frightening than if he had yelled, and he stepped into the study, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a judge's gavel. "I am sorry," I stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I didn't mean to, it was an accident. I just knocked the table and the chess pieces fell and something clicked and I tried to close it, but it won't close. I didn't mean to see anything. I swear I didn't." He moved toward me with that same liquid grace I had noticed before, predatory and controlled, and I found myself pressing back against the wall, even though there was nowhere to go, trapped between the desk and his approaching form. He glanced at the monitors, at the screen showing the room where he had just killed that man, and something flickered across his face, some calculation I couldn't read. "Now you have seen things you were not supposed to see," he said, stopping a few feet away, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes, close enough that I could see the fine spray of blood across his collar, could smell the cordite that clung to him beneath his expensive cologne. "That complicates matters." I tried to speak, to apologize again or beg or do something to fix the situation I had stumbled into, but my throat had closed up with fear and no words would come. His eyes held mine, gray and intense and utterly unreadable, and I realized that I had crossed some invisible line, had gone from innocent bystander to witness, from someone he could protect and release to someone who knew too much. The surveillance monitors glowed behind me, my own face visible on one screen looking small and terrified and completely at his mercy, and I understood with sudden horrible clarity that he had been watching me long before the shooting started, had known exactly where I was when he locked me in this room, had chosen to protect me for reasons I didn't understand. The study felt different now, no longer a beautiful showcase of wealth and taste, but a trap designed to look like luxury, the expensive furniture and original art and Persian rugs just window dressing for something darker underneath. My cleaning supplies still lay scattered on the floor. Bottles of furniture polish and glass cleaner absurdly domestic next to the surveillance equipment. Ordinary objects from my ordinary life that felt like relics from another world. A simpler world where the worst thing I had to worry about was making rent and paying medical bills and getting to my next shift on time. Beyond the windows, the city continued its oblivious existence, the sun starting its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and I thought about all those people down there living their normal lives, going home to their families, complaining about traffic or their bosses or what to have for dinner, and I wanted to scream at them that nothing was normal, that violence and death existed 40 stories above their heads, that a man with storm-gray eyes and blood on his hands was standing close enough to touch me, and I didn't know if he was my savior or my executioner. He was still watching me, waiting for something, and I forced myself to meet his gaze even though everything in me wanted to look away, wanted to make myself small and unthreatening and forgettable. But I had a feeling that this man never forgot anything, that my face was already burned into his memory, along with every other detail he had absorbed with those sharp, calculating eyes, and the thought made me shiver. The hidden compartment was still open, the monitors still glowing, evidence of my disobedience and curiosity displayed for both of us to see. And I knew that whatever happened next would determine whether I walked out of this penthouse alive or ended up like the bodies in the hallway, another casualty of a world I didn't understand, collateral damage in a war I hadn't known was being fought. The tension in the room crackled like electricity before a storm, charged and dangerous and inevitable. And I realized that the moment he had locked me in this study, the moment he had given me that command, "Don't move until I come back," my life had changed irrevocably, had tilted off its axis into something new and terrifying and utterly beyond my control. He pulled his phone from his pocket without breaking eye contact, his thumb moving across the screen with practiced ease, and I watched as he brought it to his ear, his expression unreadable as someone answered on the other end. "Marco," he said, his voice still carrying that controlled calm that made my skin prickle with unease. "Run a background check on Maya Castellano, full workup, 5 minutes." He ended the call without waiting for a response, sliding the phone back into his pocket, and then he moved to the bar cart I hadn't noticed before, tucked into the corner beside a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf, crystal decanters catching the fading afternoon light. I stood frozen by the desk, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to process what was happening, what it meant that he was running a background check, what he expected to find, what he would do with whatever information his associate uncovered. The sound of liquid pouring drew my attention, and I watched as he filled a heavy crystal tumbler with amber liquid. Whiskey, probably, his movements precise and controlled despite the blood staining his white dress shirt. He had killed 4 men. I had watched him execute someone on those monitors, and now he was pouring himself a drink like this was just another Friday afternoon, like violence and death were so routine they didn't even warrant a change in his breathing pattern. He turned toward me, the glass in one hand, and gestured to the bar cart with the other. "Water," he said, not quite a question, not quite a command, something in between that suggested he was offering courtesy while making it clear refusal would be noted. I shook my head, not trusting my voice, my hands still trembling too badly to hold anything without dropping it, and I watched something flicker in his eyes, Assessment maybe? Or calculation, filing away this small detail along with everything else he had observed about me. He crossed to one of the leather chairs positioned near the windows, lowering himself into it with fluid grace, and took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving my face. I remained standing by the desk, trapped between the furniture and the hidden compartment still glowing with its surveillance feeds, uncertain whether I was supposed to sit or stand or speak or stay silent. Every social cue I had ever learned useless in this situation that had careened so far beyond normal interaction. The silence stretched between us, heavy and expectant, and I found myself cataloging details about him to keep my mind from spiraling into panic. He had shed the bloody dress shirt at some point, I realized, though I hadn't seen him do it. And now he wore only a black t-shirt that clung to a frame that was all lean muscle and controlled power, his forearms exposed and marked with tattoos that I couldn't quite make out in the fading light. Dark ink traced up from his wrists, disappearing beneath the short sleeves. Elegant script mixed with symbols that looked vaguely religious. And I wondered what story they told, what they meant to him, why a man who lived in a penthouse worth millions and wore custom-tailored shirts had marked his skin like that. His phone buzzed and he pulled it out, his eyes dropping to the screen, and I watched his expression change, saw something shift behind those storm-gray eyes as he read whatever information Marco had sent. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his fingers curling slightly around the phone, and when he looked back up at me there was a new intensity in his gaze, a sharpness that made me want to step backward even though I had nowhere to go. "Maya Castellano," he said, my name sounding strange in his mouth, formal and weighted with new significance. 28 years old, born at St. Catherine's Hospital, graduated from Lincoln High School with honors. He paused, his thumb scrolling across the screen. 1 year of community college before you dropped out, currently residing at 2847 Morrison Street, apartment 4B. He looked up at me, and I felt stripped bare, exposed, every detail of my small, struggling life laid out for his examination. "The poorest part of the city," he continued, his voice neutral, but his eyes missing nothing. 3 jobs, the cleaning service, a diner on 5th Street, weekend shifts at a grocery store. His finger moved across the screen again, and I wanted to snatch the phone from his hand, wanted to stop him from reading the most shameful parts of my existence, the failures and debts and desperate scrambling that defined my daily reality. "Your mother, Angela Castellano, age 54, residing at the same address, diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer 18 months ago, currently in palliative care. Medical debt totaling $186,000. I felt the blood drain from my face, felt my legs go weak beneath me, and I reached out to steady myself against the desk, my fingers gripping the edge hard enough to hurt. How dare he, I thought. How dare he dig into my life, into my mother's illness, into the private struggles we had kept hidden from everyone. The desperate math we did every month trying to figure out which bills to pay and which to let slide. The slow slide into poverty that medical care had caused, despite insurance that covered almost nothing that mattered. He was still watching me, his expression unreadable, and then he said something that made the world tilt beneath my feet. "Your father was Vincent Castellano." It wasn't a question, wasn't a request for confirmation, just a statement of fact delivered in that same controlled voice, and I felt 12 years of carefully constructed walls crack and crumble. I hadn't heard my father's name spoken aloud since the day he disappeared, since I was 16 years old and came home from school to find my mother crying at the kitchen table with a note that said nothing useful, nothing that explained where he was going or why or if he was ever coming back. Vincent Castellano, a name I had taught myself not to think about, not to say, not to acknowledge because acknowledging him meant acknowledging the abandonment, the betrayal, the way he had left us drowning in debt while he vanished into whatever new life he had chosen over his family. The man with storm-gray eyes set his whiskey down and leaned forward in his chair, his elbows resting on his knees, his attention focused entirely on me with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "Your father worked for the Moretti family before he disappeared," he said, and I realized he hadn't introduced himself, hadn't told me his name, but now I knew. Moretti. This was his family, his legacy, his world. "My father's generation," he continued. "He was my father's most trusted accountant, handled the books, managed the legitimate businesses, knew every detail of our financial operations. Which means you are not here by accident." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I shook my head frantically, denial rising up hot and desperate in my chest. "I don't know anything about my father's work," I said, my voice coming out stronger than I expected, anger cutting through the fear. "He abandoned us when I was 16. I haven't seen him since. I don't know anything about your world or your family or whatever business he was involved in. I take whatever cleaning assignments the service gives me. I needed the money. That's the only reason I'm here." Dante, I realized his first name must be Dante, didn't look convinced, his gray eyes searching my face for tells, for lies, for any indication that I knew more than I was saying. "The cleaning service sent you specifically to my penthouse," he said, his voice soft but carrying an edge of steel. "Today of all days, when I had a meeting with the Kozlovs, when tensions were already high, when an attack was not just possible but probable. You were sent here, Maya, whether you knew it or not." I felt tears prick at my eyes, frustration and fear and exhaustion combining into something that felt like it might break me. "I work 3 jobs," I said, each word deliberate and hard. "I barely sleep. I can't afford to eat most days. I haven't bought new clothes in 2 years. My mother is dying and I can't afford the medications that would make her comfortable, and you think I have time to be involved in some conspiracy. I don't even know what the Kozlovs are. I have never heard that name before in my life. I just needed the money from this job to pay rent that's due in 5 days." My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated myself for the weakness. Hated that he was seeing me like this, vulnerable and desperate and on the edge of breaking. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then he asked the question I had been dreading since he spoke my father's name. "Did he ever contact you?" he said quietly. "After he disappeared, did Vincent ever send you anything, call you, leave you any messages or packages or information?" I shook my head, the old grief rising up to choke me. "He left us with nothing but debt," I said, the bitterness I had carried for 12 years seeping into every syllable. "If he had money, if he had this $2 million you seem to think he stole, we never saw any of it. We lost our house. My mother had to take 3 jobs just like I do now. I had to drop out of college because we couldn't afford it. Whatever my father did, whatever he took, he didn't share it with the family he left behind." Dante leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, and I could see him processing this information, weighing it against whatever he had expected to find. The evening was settling over the city beyond the windows, the sky deepening from pink to purple to the first hints of darkness, and I realized that the bodies in the hallway must have been removed at some point, that his people had come and gone while he was changing his shirt and pouring his whiskey and waiting for the background check on me. The penthouse was quiet now, the earlier violence erased as if it had never happened, and only the 2 of us remained in this study with its hidden surveillance and its scattered chess pieces and its secrets I had stumbled into by accident. "Your father was brilliant with numbers," Dante said, his voice carrying a note that might have been respect or might have been regret. "He could see patterns no one else saw, could move money through systems in ways that left no trace. My father trusted him completely, which in our world is rare and valuable. And then $2 million went missing from accounts only Vincent had access to, and he disappeared the same night." He paused, his eyes holding mine. "My father spent years looking for him, convinced he was still alive, convinced he had stolen that money and run. He died 5 years ago without ever finding Vincent, without ever recovering the money, without ever getting answers." I heard the pain beneath the controlled words, the loss that paralleled my own in strange ways, and I realized that my father's disappearance had hurt more people than just me and my mother. "He destroyed your family too," I said quietly, and Dante's expression flickered with something that might have been acknowledgement. "The money itself was not the issue," he said. "It was the betrayal, the broken trust, the fact that my father had let someone close enough to hurt him and been proven wrong. It changed him, made him harder, more suspicious, more willing to see enemies everywhere." He met my eyes and I saw something raw in his gaze, something he probably didn't let many people see. It taught me that trust is a weakness, that loyalty is an illusion, that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning, and I understood that we were both casualties of Vincent Castellano's choices, both shaped by his abandonment in ways that had fundamentally altered the trajectories of our lives. The man I had thought was my father, the accountant who had helped me with my math homework and taught me to play chess and promised he would always protect me, had been living a double life I never suspected, involved in a world I couldn't imagine, and when that world had demanded a choice, he had chosen to save himself and leave everyone else behind. "I don't know where he is," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if he's alive or dead. I don't know where the money went. I don't know anything useful. I'm just a maid who was cleaning your study when people started shooting, and now I've seen things I wish I hadn't, and I just want to go home to my mother." Dante stood, his movements fluid and controlled, and crossed to where I still stood by the desk. He was close enough now that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes, close enough that I could see the individual lashes framing those storm-gray irises, close enough that his presence felt overwhelming, consuming, impossible to ignore. "The problem," he said softly, "is that you can't go home, because now the Kozlovs know you were here during the attack, and they will wonder why I protected you, what you mean to me, what you might know. And if they think you have value, if they think hurting you might hurt me, or give them leverage, they will not hesitate to take you." His hand came up and I flinched instinctively, but he only brushed his fingers against my cheek, a touch so gentle, it seemed at odds with everything I had seen him do. "You are Vincent Castellano's daughter," he murmured. "And whether you know anything or not, that makes you valuable, that makes you a target, that makes you someone I cannot simply let walk away." The words should have terrified me, should have sent me scrambling for escape, but instead I felt a strange inevitability settle over me, a sense that from the moment my father had chosen to work for the Moretti family, from the moment he had stolen that money and disappeared, this confrontation had been waiting for me. This connection between his daughter and his employer's son had been written in stars I couldn't see. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, and Dante's thumb traced across my cheekbone, his touch impossibly gentle from hands I had watched kill. "The truth," he said, "and time to figure out if you are really as innocent as you seem, or if your father taught you to lie as well as he did." Dante stepped back, creating space between us that felt deliberate, calculated, and gestured toward the leather chairs as if we were about to have a normal conversation, as if the last hour hadn't shattered every assumption I had about safety and normalcy and the predictable progression of my small, struggling life. I remained standing, my back still pressed against the desk, unwilling to settle into the comfort he offered because accepting his hospitality felt like accepting everything else. The violence and the surveillance and the way he looked at me like I was a puzzle he intended to solve. He seemed to read my refusal in my posture because his mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile, more like acknowledgement of a point scored, and he lowered himself into one of the chairs with that fluid grace that suggested violence barely leashed. "The men who attacked today were the Kozlov organization," he said, his voice taking on a lecturing quality, as if he were explaining something to a student who needed to understand the gravity of her situation. "They are Russian, brutal, And they have been looking for something they believe I have for the past 5 years. Ledgers from 12 years ago that prove their human trafficking operations, detailed records of every transaction, every shipment, every politician and businessman they have in their pocket. He paused, his gray eyes holding mine. Your father kept those ledgers, Maya. He was meticulous about documentation, and when he disappeared, they vanished with him. The Kozlovs have been searching for them ever since because those records could destroy their entire organization, could put dozens of powerful men in prison, could unravel a network that spans continents. I felt cold spreading through my chest, ice in my veins, because this was so far beyond anything I had imagined, beyond simple theft or embezzlement or whatever crime I had vaguely assumed my father had committed. Human trafficking, the words seemed to echo in my head, and I thought about my father helping me with homework, teaching me chess, kissing my mother goodbye each morning, and I couldn't reconcile those memories with a man who kept records of slavery, who documented the buying and selling of human beings like they were inventory in a warehouse. If the Kozlovs know you are Vincent Castellano's daughter, Dante continued, each word precise and deliberate, and that you were here today during their attack, they will assume one of two things. Either you are working for me, helping me find the ledgers, or you know where your father hid the evidence. Either way, you become valuable to them and they will not ask nicely for information. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious in a way that made my stomach clench. They will take you. They will hurt you until you tell them everything you know. And when they realize you truly know nothing, they will kill you anyway, because loose ends are liabilities in this world. I shook my head, denial rising up hot and desperate. How would they even know I was here? I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. How would they know my name, or who my father was, or make any connection between a random cleaning woman and someone who disappeared 12 years ago? Dante pulled out his phone, his thumb moving across the screen, and then he turned it toward me. The display showed surveillance footage from outside the building, a grainy black and white image of the service entrance where I had arrived hours ago that felt like days. Two men sat in a black sedan parked across the street, and as I watched, one of them raised a camera with a telephoto lens, pointing it at the entrance. The timestamp showed this morning, 30 minutes before I had entered the building. They photograph everyone who comes and goes, Dante said quietly. They run facial recognition, they check backgrounds, they build databases of potential leverage points. His finger swiped to another image, this one showing me more clearly, walking toward the service entrance with my cleaning supplies, my face visible despite the distance. They already have your picture, they already know you were here, and it is only a matter of time before they identify you and discover your connection to Vincent. The ice in my veins turned to liquid nitrogen, freezing me from the inside out, because I could see it now, could see how my ordinary Friday afternoon cleaning job had marked me as something significant in a war I didn't understand. I had walked into this building thinking about rent and medical bills and whether I had time to grab coffee between this shift and my evening job at the diner, and I had walked into a trap that had been waiting for me since my father disappeared. A trap built from his choices and his secrets and his betrayals. You have two options, Dante said, his voice gentle now, almost kind, which somehow made the words more terrifying. Leave now. Go home to your mother. Pretend this never happened, and hope the Kozlovs do not connect you to this. Do not decide you are worth investigating further. He paused, his eyes searching my face. Or stay here under my protection until I neutralize the threat, until I find the ledgers or eliminate the Kozlov organization, or otherwise ensure they have no reason to come after you. The choice felt impossible, felt like being asked to decide between two different deaths, slow or fast, certain or merely probable. I looked around the study, at the expensive furniture, and the hidden surveillance, and the windows overlooking a city that suddenly felt hostile and dangerous. And I thought about my mother in our small apartment, sick and fragile, and depending on me to work my 3 jobs and pay the bills and keep us afloat. I cannot stay here, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I have responsibilities. My mother needs me. I have shifts at the diner tonight and the grocery store tomorrow, and bills that will not wait just because I am hiding in your penthouse. I met his eyes, saw something flicker there that might have been disappointment, or might have been the satisfaction of a prediction confirmed. I am not staying here. I will not be a prisoner. I will not let you lock me up just because you think there might be a threat. Then you will be a corpse, he said, the words flat and matter of fact, and I flinched at the brutality of it. His expression softened slightly, and he added, quieter now, I am not the villain in your story, Maya. I am the only reason you are still alive. The only thing standing between you and people who will do things to you that will make you beg for death. You do not know that, I shot back, anger cutting through the fear, because anger was easier. Anger gave me strength where terror would have made me weak. You are trying to scare me into staying, trying to make me dependent on you, but I have been taking care of myself and my mother for 12 years, and I do not need protection from a man who just killed 4 people. I know the Kozlovs, Dante said, and there was something in his voice now, something hard and certain that made me pause. I have been at war with them for 5 years, since my father died and I took over the family business. I have seen what they do to people who get in their way. I have buried friends and associates and innocent bystanders who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. He stood moving toward me with that controlled power that made my pulse quicken despite everything. You think I am the monster? He said softly. But I am not the one who will torture you for information you do not have. I am not the one who will make you watch while they hurt your mother to force your cooperation. I am not the one who deals in human lives like commodities. His hand came up, and I forced myself not to flinch as he tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the gesture oddly intimate. Call me when you realize you are being followed, he murmured. You have until midnight before they make their move, before they decide whether you are worth the risk of taking, and when you call, I will come for you. I pulled away from his touch, needing distance, needing to reclaim some sense of control over a situation that had spiraled so far beyond my ability to manage. I am leaving, I said, and I hated that my voice shook slightly, hated that he could probably hear the fear I was trying to hide beneath defiance. I am going home to my mother, and I am going to my shift at the diner, and I am going to pretend this day never happened. Dante did not argue, did not try to stop me, just watched with those storm-gray eyes as I gathered what remained of my dignity and moved toward the door. The study looked different than it had this afternoon, I realized, cleaner somehow, and I understood that while we had been talking, his people had been working, erasing the evidence of violence, removing the bodies, cleaning the blood, making everything pristine and perfect, as if men had not died in this penthouse just hours ago. The efficiency of it was almost more frightening than the violence itself, the casual ease with which murder could be disappeared, could be made to never have happened in the eyes of anyone who did not know to look for signs. I reached the door and paused, my hand on the handle, some instinct making me turn back to look at him. He had not moved, still stood where I had left him, but he pulled a card from his pocket, heavy cream-colored stock with embossed lettering, and held it out to me. My private number, he said. Not the one that goes through assistance or security, the one that rings directly to me no matter what time, no matter what I am doing. When you call, and you will call Maya, I will answer. I crossed back to him, hating that I was taking the card, hating that some part of me knew he was right, that I would need it, that midnight was coming, and with it whatever decision the Kozlovs would make about whether I was worth pursuing. Our fingers brushed as I took the card from his hand, and electricity sparked between us, undeniable and unwelcome, my body responding to his proximity despite my mind's insistence that he was dangerous, that he had killed people, that he represented everything I should fear and avoid. He felt it too, I saw it in the slight widening of his pupils, the almost imperceptible catch in his breath. And for a moment we stood frozen, hands touching, eyes locked, the air between us charged with something that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the attraction I refused to acknowledge. I pulled away first, shoving the card into my pocket, and turned back toward the door without another word. Because if I stayed another moment, if I let him see how much his touch affected me, I would lose what little ground I had managed to hold. The hallway beyond the study was empty and pristine, no sign of the violence that had occurred, and I walked quickly toward the elevator, my footsteps echoing on marble floors, past closed doors that probably hid more secrets, more surveillance, more evidence of a world that existed parallel to mine, but followed completely different rules. The elevator arrived quickly, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. And as the doors began to close, I saw Dante appear at the end of the hallway, watching me leave. His expression unreadable, but his posture somehow conveying certainty, as if he knew exactly how this would end, as if my departure was just another move in a game he had already won. The elevator descended smoothly, 40 floors passing in seconds, and I watched the numbers tick down while my mind raced through everything that had happened, everything he had said, everything I had learned about my father and the Kozlovs, and the ledgers that had turned me into a target without my knowledge or consent. The lobby was busy with Friday evening activity, people coming and going, doormen in crisp uniforms helping residents with packages and opening doors for taxis, normal people living normal lives, and I slipped among them like a ghost, invisible and unremarkable, just another working woman heading home after a long shift. The evening air hit me as I stepped outside, cool and slightly damp, carrying the smell of the city, exhaust and concrete, and humanity compressed into a few square miles of vertical living. I turned toward the subway station, my usual route home, and tried to ignore the crawling sensation between my shoulder blades, the feeling of being watched that was probably just paranoia, probably just my imagination running wild after the shock of the afternoon. The card in my pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric, Dante's private number a lifeline I refused to admit I might need, and I thought about his words, "You have until midnight before they make their move," and wondered if he was right. Wondered if somewhere in the gathering darkness, men in a black sedan were already following me, already making plans, already deciding my fate. I descended into the subway, into the familiar crush of evening commuters, and let the crowd carry me toward home, toward my mother, toward the illusion of safety that was all I had left to cling to, and tried not to think about storm-gray eyes watching me leave, tried not to remember the certainty in his voice when he said, "I would call," tried not to acknowledge that some part of me already knew he was right. The apartment building looked exactly as it always did when I climbed the 4 flights of stairs because the elevator had been broken for 3 weeks and the landlord kept promising to fix it. Dim hallway lights flickering, the smell of cooking from various apartments mixing with mildew and age, the worn carpet that had probably been installed before I was born, and now showed paths of traffic like game trails through forest. I had lived here for 8 years, since we lost the house after my father disappeared, and I knew every stain on these walls, every crack in the plaster, every sound the building made as it settled through the night. But tonight, everything felt different, hostile somehow, as if the familiar had become threatening through some alchemy of fear and knowledge I wished I could unknow. My key scraped in the lock, and I stepped inside apartment 4B, at exactly 11:47, according to the clock on the microwave, the only timepiece we owned that still worked reliably. The living room was dark except for the blue glow from my mother's oxygen concentrator, the machine that kept her breathing humming its constant rhythm, and I could see her small form on the couch where she spent most of her time now, too weak to make it to the bedroom, a blanket pulled up to her chin despite the warmth of the evening. I moved quietly across the cramped space, past the second-hand furniture we had collected over years of thrift store shopping, past the small kitchen with its chipped countertops and ancient appliances, past the card table that served as our dining area, and checked the locks on the front door, sliding the deadbolt, engaging the chain, checking once and then twice, and then a third time because Dante's words kept echoing in my head. You have until midnight before they make their move. The apartment felt smaller than usual, more claustrophobic, the peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceiling pressing down like the walls were closing in. And I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that Dante had exaggerated the danger to scare me into staying, that the Kozlovs had better things to do than track down a cleaning woman who knew nothing useful, that I was safe here in my own home with my sick mother and my triple-locked door. I moved to the window, the one that looked out over Morrison Street, and peered through the gap in the cheap curtains we had hung years ago, looking for black sedans or suspicious men or any sign that I had been followed. But I saw only the normal late-night activity of a poor neighborhood, a few people walking home from late shifts, someone taking out trash, a stray cat slinking between parked cars. Nothing threatening, nothing unusual, just the ordinary struggle of people trying to survive in a city that cared nothing for their existence. I let the curtain fall back into place and turned away from the window, telling myself to breathe, to calm down, to remember that I had been taking care of myself and my mother for 12 years, without help from dangerous men in penthouses. My phone was still in my pocket, along with the card Dante had given me, and I pulled both out, staring at the heavy cream-colored stock with its embossed number, and I almost threw it in the trash, almost destroyed this connection to a world I wanted no part of, but something stopped me. Some instinct for self-preservation that whispered I might need it, even if I never wanted to admit that need. I set the card on the counter and moved to check on my mother, adjusting her blanket, feeling her forehead for fever, listening to the rasp of her breathing beneath the oxygen cannula, and guilt flooded through me hot and acidic, because she was here vulnerable and sick, and I had brought danger to our door through no fault of hers, through the sins of a father who had abandoned us both. At 11:52, my phone buzzed in my hand, and I nearly dropped it, my heart lurching into my throat, and I looked at the screen to see a text from an unknown number, no words, just an image loading slowly on my cheap phone with its spotty data connection. The first photo showed me leaving this building this morning, my hair in a ponytail, wearing the jeans and jacket I had on now, my face clearly visible as I walked toward the bus stop. I stared at it, confusion mixing with growing dread, and then the second image loaded, showing me at the diner where I worked my evening shift, visible through the window as I refilled coffee for a customer, the timestamp showing 6:15 p.m., just a few hours ago. The third image was me entering Dante's building this afternoon, walking through that service entrance with my cleaning supplies, and I knew without checking that this was the same surveillance footage he had shown me on his phone, the Kozlovs documenting everyone who came and went. The fourth image loaded and ice flooded my veins because it showed me standing at this window, right now, looking out through the curtains, the photo taken from street level looking up, the timestamp reading 11:51 p.m., taken 60 seconds ago, taken while I was standing here telling myself I was safe. I ran to the window and yanked the curtain aside with shaking hands, my eyes scanning the street below, and there it was, the black sedan from Dante's footage, parked directly across from my building under a broken streetlight, and as I watched, two men got out, big men in dark clothes, moving with purpose toward my building's entrance. Terror turned my blood to ice water, and I stumbled backward from the window, my phone clutched in my hand, my mind racing through options I didn't have. The building had no back exit, the fire escape was rusted through and unsafe. I was 4 floors up with a sick mother who could barely walk, and 2 men were coming for me right now, climbing these stairs, counting down the floors until they reached Apartment 4B with its flimsy locks and cheap door that would not stop determined men for more than a few seconds. My fingers found Dante's card on the counter and I grabbed it, punching his number into my phone with hands that shook so badly I had to try twice, and he answered on the first ring before I even heard it ring on my end, his voice low and certain. "Where are you?" he said. No greeting, no surprise, just that immediate question. And I realized he had been waiting for this call, had known I would need him, had probably been ready to move the moment his phone rang. "You were right," I whispered, trying to keep my voice down so I wouldn't wake my mother, trying not to let the terror swallow me whole. "They are here. They are coming up the stairs right now, please, my mother. I cannot leave her." "I am already outside," he said, and I heard car doors slamming in the background, heard him moving, heard the controlled urgency in his voice. "Pack a bag for both of you. Medication, documents, anything essential. 2 minutes." I ran to my mother's side, my hands scrambling to gather her medications from the side table, where we kept them organized in a pill organizer and prescription bottles, shoving them into my purse without bothering to sort them. "Both of us," I said into the phone, my voice breaking slightly. "Dante, she is sick, she cannot travel, she needs the oxygen concentrator." "I don't leave loose ends," he said, his voice hard now. "And your mother is one. She is leverage they can use against you. She is a vulnerability I will not allow them to exploit. Move now, Maya. Get her ready to travel." I shoved my phone in my pocket and moved to wake my mother, my hands gentle on her shoulder despite the urgency screaming through my veins. "Mom," I said softly, and her eyes fluttered open, confused and hazy with the medication she took for pain. "We have to go. We have to leave right now." Her thin hand gripped mine, her breathing labored even with the oxygen. "What is happening?" she whispered, her voice weak and thready. "Where are we going?" I pulled the oxygen cannula from her nose and disconnected it from the concentrator, knowing we would need a portable tank, but we didn't have one. Knowing I was making choices that could hurt her, but staying here would be worse. "People are coming," I said, helping her sit up, wrapping her robe around her thin frame. "Dad's people, or people looking for Dad, it doesn't matter. We have to go." I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, heavy boots on worn carpet, and voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize, Russian maybe, getting closer. I ran to the window and looked down to see a black SUV pulled up behind the sedan, and Dante was there, tall and unmistakable even in the darkness, and 4 men with him, all moving with that same controlled efficiency I had seen in his penthouse. As I watched, he looked up and our eyes met across 40 feet of empty air, and he mouthed words I could read even without sound. "Come down now." The apartment door shuddered as something heavy hit it from the outside, testing the locks, and my mother made a small frightened sound that broke my heart. I grabbed her under her arms and hauled her to her feet, her weight almost nothing, all brittle bones and wasted muscle, and I half carried, half dragged her toward the door even though every instinct screamed not to go toward the danger. But Dante was down there. Dante had come like he promised, and somehow I knew with absolute certainty that if I could get my mother down those 4 flights of stairs, we would be safe, or at least safer than we were in this apartment with its flimsy door and broken locks. The door shuddered again, harder this time, and I heard wood beginning to splinter, heard the chain straining, and I knew I had seconds at most. I unlocked the deadbolt with shaking hands and yanked the door open just as the men on the other side prepared to hit it again. And I found myself face to face with 2 massive men in dark clothing, their expressions shifting from surprise to calculation as they took in me and my sick mother huddled in the doorway. One of them reached for me, and I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed, a sound of pure terror that echoed through the hallway and made doors crack open as neighbors peered out to see what was happening. The man's hand closed on my arm, and I kicked at him wildly, my mother clinging to me and crying, and then I heard new footsteps, running footsteps coming up the stairs, and Dante appeared at the top of the landing with a gun in his hand and an expression of cold fury on his face. "Let her go," he said, his voice soft and deadly, and the man holding my arm released me immediately, stepping back with his hands raised. Dante's eyes never left the 2 men as he moved toward us, his weapon trained on them with unwavering precision. "You have 5 seconds to leave this building before I put bullets in both of you," he said, each word clipped and precise. "Tell Kozlov that Maya Castellano is under my protection, that touching her or her mother means war, that if he wants those ledgers, he will have to negotiate with me." The two men exchanged glances, and then turned and walked quickly toward the stairs, their retreat controlled but definite, and Dante waited until they disappeared down the stairwell before he lowered his weapon and turned to me. His eyes took in my terrified expression. My mother collapsed against me, the apartment behind us with its broken door and scattered belongings. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and I shook my head, unable to find words. One of his men appeared beside him, younger, dark-haired, efficient-looking. "This is Marco," Dante said. "He will carry your mother. I will cover you going down." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist I could manage on my own, but my mother could barely stand and I could hear more footsteps below, voices echoing up the stairwell, and I knew we were out of time. Marco stepped forward and lifted my mother with surprising gentleness, cradling her against his chest like she weighed nothing, and she looked at me with frightened eyes but didn't protest. Dante's hand found the small of my back, guiding me toward the stairs, his body positioned between me and any threat that might appear. "Stay close," he murmured, and I felt the solid weight of him beside me, felt his presence like a shield between me and a world that had turned hostile and incomprehensible. We descended quickly, Marco moving with my mother, two more of Dante's men ahead clearing the way, two behind watching for pursuit, and I was in the center of this protective formation like some precious cargo being transported under guard. The building's entrance appeared, and we burst through onto Morrison Street where the black SUV waited, engine running, back door open. Marco settled my mother in the back seat and I climbed in beside her, pulling her close, and Dante slid in on my other side while his men took positions in the front seats and a second vehicle. The door closed, and we were moving before I could process what was happening, pulling away from the building I had called home for 8 years, leaving behind everything I owned, except the medications in my purse and the clothes on our backs. Through the rear window I watched my building recede, watched the black sedan still parked across the street, watched my old life disappear into the darkness, and I knew with terrible certainty that I would never return, that everything had changed irrevocably the moment I answered Dante's phone call, the moment I accepted his protection, the moment I acknowledged that he had been right and I had been dangerously, foolishly wrong. My mother's head rested against my shoulder, her breathing labored, and I stroked her thin hair and tried not to cry. "I am sorry," I whispered, "so sorry I brought this to you." Dante's hand covered mine where it rested on my mother's arm, his touch warm and solid. "You didn't bring this," he said quietly. "Your father did, 12 years ago when he made his choices. You are just living with the consequences, and I will not let those consequences destroy you." I looked at him in the darkness of the moving vehicle, his profile illuminated by passing streetlights, and I saw not the dangerous man who had killed 4 people this afternoon, but someone else, someone complicated and possibly trustworthy, someone who had dropped everything to come for me when I called, who had brought my mother into his protection without hesitation, who was risking war with the Kozlovs to keep me safe. The city passed outside the windows, familiar streets giving way to unfamiliar ones as we headed away from my neighborhood toward parts of town I rarely visited, toward wealth and security and a future I couldn't begin to imagine. And I surrendered to the inevitable because I had no choice left. Because the moment those men came to my door, my illusion of independence had shattered. Because Dante Moretti had been right about everything, and I had been living in denial, pretending I could survive in a world that had marked me for death before I even knew I was in danger. The estate materialized out of darkness like something from a dream. High walls topped with cameras and sensors, gates that opened silently at our approach, a long driveway lined with trees that blocked any view from the road, and then the house itself, sprawling and elegant, in a way that spoke of old money and older power, 3 stories of stone and glass set among manicured grounds that probably employed a full-time staff just to maintain. My mother had been given something in the SUV, some sedative that Dante's doctor had administered with gentle efficiency, and she slept now against my shoulder, her breathing easier than it had been in months, and I wondered what medication they had used that I couldn't afford, what treatment they could provide that had been beyond our reach despite her desperate need. We pulled up to a side entrance, and Marco appeared to lift my mother again, carrying her through doors held open by staff who materialized and disappeared like ghosts, efficient and silent. And I followed in a daze, as we moved through hallways decorated with art that probably belonged in museums, past rooms glimpsed through open doors that showed wealth I couldn't begin to calculate, until we reached a wing that felt separate from the rest of the house, quieter somehow, more private. The room they brought my mother to made me stop in the doorway, made my breath catch in my throat, because it looked like a luxury hotel suite combined with a hospital room, with a proper hospital bed positioned near windows that overlooked gardens invisible in the darkness. Medical equipment that was newer and more sophisticated than anything I had seen in the hospice care facility we couldn't afford. Monitors and IV stands and an oxygen system built into the wall itself. A woman in scrubs was already there, gray-haired and competent-looking, and she smiled at me with professional warmth as Marco settled my mother on the bed. "I am Helen," she said. "I am a registered nurse, and I will be caring for your mother tonight, making sure she is comfortable and monitoring her vitals." Dante appeared at my elbow, his presence solid and grounding in a situation that felt increasingly surreal. "Helen worked with my father for years," he said quietly. "She is the best. Your mother will have everything she needs." I watched as Helen efficiently checked my mother's breathing, adjusted her position, connected her to monitors that began their soft beeping, and I felt tears prick at my eyes because this was what I had wanted to give her for 18 months. This level of care, this comfort, this attention, and I had failed to provide it while a stranger, a dangerous man who had walked into my life hours ago, had delivered it without hesitation. "She will sleep through the night," Helen said, turning to me with kind eyes. "The sedative will wear off gradually, and when she wakes she will be confused but not in pain. I will be here to explain everything and to contact you immediately. You should rest. You have had a difficult day." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist on staying by my mother's side, but exhaustion was crashing over me in waves and I could barely stand, adrenaline draining away and leaving me hollow and shaking. Dante's hand found the small of my back again, that touch that was becoming familiar, grounding, and he guided me from the room with gentle insistence. "You can see her in the morning," he said as we walked through more hallways. "She is safe here, safer than she has been in years. Helen will call if there is any change." He brought me to another room, smaller than my mother's but still luxurious beyond anything I had experienced, with a bed that looked impossibly soft, and a bathroom visible through an open door that was larger than my bedroom in the apartment I would never see again. "There are clothes in the closet that should fit," he said, "toiletries in the bathroom. Anything you need, just use the phone on the nightstand and staff will bring it. Sleep, Maya. We will talk in the morning." But I couldn't sleep. Couldn't imagine closing my eyes and surrendering to unconsciousness when my entire world had been upended, when everything I thought I knew had been revealed as illusion, when my father's secrets had reached across 12 years to destroy the fragile life I had built. "I need to understand," I said, my voice rough with exhaustion and unshed tears. "I need to know what my father did, what he left behind, why any of this is happening." Dante studied me for a long moment, his gray eyes searching my face, and then he nodded slowly. "Come with me," he said. We walked through the quiet house, past rooms dark and silent, down a hallway I hadn't seen before, and he opened a door that led to what looked like a private office, all dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a desk that was probably an antique worth more than I had earned in my entire life. He gestured to a chair, and I sank into it gratefully, my legs finally giving out, and he settled into the chair behind the desk, his posture more relaxed now that we were in his private space. "I need to know everything your father might have told you," he said without preamble. "Any stories, any gifts, any strange instructions, anything that seemed odd or out of place, anything he emphasized or made you promise to remember." I shook my head, frustration rising. "I have told you. I don't know anything. He was just my father. He helped me with homework and taught me chess, and took me to the park on Sundays. There was nothing unusual or strange or secret about him. He was an accountant, he worked long hours, he loved my mother, and then one day he left a note and disappeared, and I never heard from him again." Dante leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "Think, Maya, there has to be something. Some detail you dismissed as unimportant, some quirk or habit that seemed normal then, but might mean something now. Did he give you anything before he left? Did he talk about the future? Did he make any promises or extract any from you?" I thought back through memories I had tried to bury for 12 years, sifting through recollections of a man I had loved, and then hated, and then tried to forget. And I found only ordinary moments, nothing that suggested he was planning to steal $2 million in ledgers documenting human trafficking and then vanish into the night. "He used to play piano," I said finally, grasping at straws, trying to give Dante something useful even though it felt pointless. "We had this old upright in our house, terrible and out of tune, but he would play it sometimes in the evenings after work. He said it helped him think." "What did he play?" Dante asked, his voice casual but his eyes intense, and I shrugged. "Classical music mostly. I don't know the names of most of the pieces. I was never musical, but there was one he played over and over, a lullaby he said his mother used to sing to him. He would play it for me when I couldn't sleep, when I had nightmares or was sick." I hummed a few bars without thinking, the melody so deeply embedded in my memory that it rose unbidden, and Dante went absolutely still, his expression shifting into something I couldn't read. "Claire de Lune," he said softly, and I blinked at him. "Is that what it is called?" I asked. I never knew the title, he just called it my song. Dante stood abruptly, moving around the desk with that controlled energy that suggested he was containing excitement or urgency, or both. "Come with me," he said again, and I followed because I had no choice. Because I was caught in his gravity now, pulled along by currents I didn't understand toward destinations I couldn't predict. He led me deeper into the house, downstairs I hadn't known existed, into a basement level that was temperature-controlled and dimly lit, and opened a door to reveal a storage room that stretched far larger than I expected, filled with boxes and filing cabinets and furniture covered in dust cloths. The accumulated detritus of a lifetime, or maybe several lifetimes. "My father's estate," Dante said, gesturing at the organized chaos. "When he died, I kept everything, thinking someday I might find answers in his belongings, clues to where Vincent had gone, or what had happened to the money, or how to recover the ledgers. I have been through most of it, but clearly I missed something." He moved through the room with purpose, pulling dustcloths off furniture, revealing chairs and tables and cabinets, and then he stopped in front of a large shape in the corner and pulled the cloth away to reveal a piano. Old and beautiful. The wood rich mahogany, the keys yellowed ivory, nothing like the cheap upright my father had played at home, but similar enough in style that it could have been from the same era. "This was in my father's study," Dante said, his voice quiet now, almost reverent. "He never played it as far as I know, it was just decoration, but he kept it tuned. Paid someone to come quarterly to maintain it. I never understood why." He turned to me, his gray eyes holding mine. "Play the lullaby," he said. "Play your father's song." I stared at him, confusion and exhaustion making it hard to process what he was asking. I told you I am not musical, I said. I never learned to play. I can barely pick out a melody with one finger. Then do that, Dante said, his voice taking on that commanding tone that made disobedience feel impossible. Play it however you can. Just recreate the melody your father played for you. I moved to the piano bench, my hands shaking slightly as I lifted the fallboard to expose the keys, and I placed my right index finger on what I thought was the right note, trying to hear my father's playing in my memory, trying to translate sound into movement. The first few notes came out hesitant and wrong, my finger finding incorrect keys, but I adjusted, following the melody line that had been burned into my brain through countless repetitions, the lullaby that had soothed my childhood fears and nightmares. The piano's tone was beautiful despite years of storage, rich and resonant, and the simple melody echoed in the large room, haunting in its simplicity. And I found myself lost in the memory of my father sitting at his cheap upright, playing this same progression of notes while I curled up on the couch nearby, safe and loved, and completely unaware that he was living a double life. I reached a specific measure, a transition between two phrases that I had always thought was particularly pretty, and something in the piano clicked, loud enough to make me jerk my hand away from the keys. Dante was beside me instantly, his hands on the piano's frame, and I watched as a section of the wooden panel beneath the keyboard swung open to reveal a hidden compartment lined with velvet. Inside was a key, small and brass, the kind that opened safety deposit boxes, and beneath it, a folded piece of paper that had yellowed slightly with age. Dante reached for the paper with careful hands and unfolded it, and I saw my father's handwriting, the precise script I remembered from birthday cards and permission slips, and the last note he had left on our kitchen table. For Maya, when the Morettis need it, the note read in my father's familiar hand. Trust Dante like I trusted Antonio. Keep the lullaby close. Your loving father, Vincent. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, hot and bitter, because he had known, had planned this, had left me a message and a key and instructions from beyond whatever grave he occupied or life he had fled to, and he had chosen to entrust this to Dante's father rather than to me or my mother, had chosen his criminal associates over his own family. He knew, I whispered, my voice breaking. He knew he was going to leave me, and he still did it. He planned it all out, left me this breadcrumb trail to follow 12 years later, and he never once considered just staying, just being the father he was supposed to be. Dante's hand found my shoulder, warm and solid, anchoring me as the grief I had buried for over a decade came flooding back. He was protecting you, Dante said quietly, his voice gentle in a way I hadn't heard from him before. If you had known where this was, if the Kozlovs or anyone else had suspected you could lead them to the ledgers, you would have been tortured for it years ago. You and your mother both. They would have done unspeakable things to make you talk. Protected me, I said, and the bitterness in my voice was corrosive, acid eating through the careful control I had maintained. I have been drowning in debt, working 3 jobs, watching my mother die slowly because we cannot afford the treatment she needs. I dropped out of college and gave up every dream I ever had, and you call that protection. I turned to look at Dante, tears streaming down my face now, all the anger and grief and exhaustion pouring out. Where was his protection when the bank foreclosed on our house? Where was it when my mother got her diagnosis? Where was it every single day I have spent barely surviving while he was God knows where, doing God knows what with his stolen money and his precious secrets? Dante pulled me to my feet and into his arms, and I didn't have the strength to resist, just collapsed against his chest and sobbed while he held me, one hand stroking my hair, his voice low and soothing. And you have been alive, he said gently. That is what he chose, Maya. Life with hardship over death with answers, suffering over torture, struggling over being used as leverage in a war you didn't understand. It was not fair. It was not right, but it was the choice he made, and he trusted that someday you would understand why. I cried against his shoulder, soaking his shirt with tears I had held back for years, and he let me. Didn't try to shush me or tell me to be strong, just held me while I fell apart. When my tears finally slowed, when I had nothing left inside except exhausted emptiness, I pulled back slightly and looked up at him. "Your father," I said, remembering the note's reference to Antonio. "What happened to him?" Dante's expression shifted, pain flickering across his features before he locked it down behind his usual control. "He was killed 5 years ago," he said. "A car bomb, meant to look like an accident, but everyone knew it was the Kozlovs, retaliation for something, we never knew what. He died believing Vincent had betrayed him, believing the man he trusted most had stolen from him and disappeared, and I inherited not just his business but his obsession with finding answers." He looked down at the key in his hand, then at the note in mine. "Your father trusted my father," he said quietly. "And in his final message he is asking you to trust me the same way. He is asking you to believe that I will use whatever is in that safety deposit box to finish what he started, to bring down the Kozlovs and end the threat that has been hanging over both our families for 12 years. I took the key from his hand, the metal warm from his touch, and looked at my father's handwriting one more time, the words "Trust Dante" standing out among the others. My father had been many things: a liar and a thief and a man who had abandoned his family, but he had also been brilliant and careful and someone who planned for every contingency. And if he had chosen Dante Moretti as the person to trust with his daughter's safety and his final secret, then maybe I should listen. "What is in the safety deposit box?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. Dante's eyes met mine, storm gray in the dim light of the storage room. "The ledgers," he said. "Every transaction, every name, every piece of evidence needed to destroy the Kozlov organization and everyone they have corrupted. Your father spent years documenting their crimes, and when he realized they were getting suspicious, when he knew his life was in danger, he stole the ledgers and hid them where no one would think to look, in a bank vault that could only be opened by his daughter playing a lullaby on a piano that belonged to his best friend's son. The complexity of it, the layers of protection and planning, made my head spin. "Why?" I asked. "Why go to all this trouble? Why not just turn the ledgers over to the police? Why make it so complicated?" "Because he did not know who to trust," Dante said. "The ledgers implicate judges and politicians and police officials, people in positions of power who could make evidence disappear or witnesses die, and he knew that if he exposed them without the right protection, they would kill him and everyone he loved. So he waited, he planned, he set up this elaborate system to ensure that when the time came, when you were old enough and the Morettis were strong enough, the ledgers would surface and justice could be served." I looked around the storage room, at the boxes and furniture and accumulated possessions of a man I had never met. Antonio Moretti, Dante's father, my father's best friend and employer, and I thought about the parallel losses we had suffered, Dante losing his father to violence, me losing mine to whatever had made him run. "Trust Dante like I trusted Antonio," my father had written, and standing here in the moonlight filtering through high windows, with this dangerous, beautiful man who had saved me and my mother and held me while I cried, I thought maybe I could, maybe I would, maybe I had no choice but to take this leap of faith into a future I couldn't predict, but that felt inevitable. Written in stars I couldn't see but could feel pulling me forward into whatever came next. I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I didn't recognize in a bed softer than anything I had ever slept in, and for one disoriented moment I thought I had dreamed the entire previous day, the gunfire and the escape, and Dante Moretti with his storm-gray eyes. But then I saw the clothes I had worn yesterday draped over a chair, and felt the weight of the brass key in the pocket of my jeans, and I knew it had all been real, was still real, was the new reality I had to navigate. I showered in a bathroom that was larger than my bedroom had been. using toiletries that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and dressed in clothes I found in the closet that fit perfectly. Jeans and a soft sweater that felt expensive against my skin, and I wondered who had stalked this room, who had known my size, how much surveillance Dante had done before yesterday's attack had forced everything into the open. Breakfast was waiting when I emerged, brought by silent staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts, and I ate mechanically while my mind raced through everything that had happened, the piano and the key, and my father's note, "Trust Dante like I trusted Antonio," and I thought about how trust was such a fragile thing, so easily broken and so hard to rebuild. Dante appeared as I was finishing my coffee, dressed in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, looking like he had slept well and had not spent yesterday killing 4 men and rescuing me from my apartment and holding me while I cried in a storage room full of ghosts. "Your mother is awake," he said without preamble. "Helen says she is comfortable in asking for you, but first we need to talk about retrieving the safety deposit box." He sat across from me at the small table, his presence filling the space, making the room feel smaller and more intimate. "Your father was careful," he continued. "The box requires biometric identification, your fingerprint specifically, which means you have to be there in person, which means we have to leave the estate and go into the city, which means potential exposure to the Kozlovs. I can provide security, armed escorts, secure transportation, but there is always risk." I nodded, understanding the calculation he was making, weighing my safety against the value of the ledgers, and I wondered if this was how he made all his decisions, in cold assessment of cost versus benefit, risk versus reward. "When do we leave?" I asked, and something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe, or satisfaction that I wasn't arguing or demanding to see my mother first, or insisting on impossible guarantees of safety. "Within the hour," he said. "I have already called the bank. They are expecting us. We will have a window of time when the vault is relatively empty, and we can minimize witnesses." The key in my pocket felt heavier suddenly, weighted with significance and danger, and I thought about my father's hands placing it in that piano compartment, about him planning this moment 12 years ago, about how he had orchestrated events from beyond death or disappearance to bring me here to this choice. The alarm started without warning, a shrill electronic wail that made me jump and sent Dante to his feet instantly, his hand going to his waistband where I now saw he carried a gun, had probably been carrying one all along beneath his expensive clothes. "Stay here," he commanded, moving toward the door, but before he reached it, his phone buzzed, and I saw his expression change, saw fury flash across his features as he read whatever message had appeared on the screen. "They are inside the perimeter," he said, his voice hard and controlled. "Someone gave them the security codes. Someone betrayed us. They are already on the grounds." Gunfire erupted somewhere in the house, muffled by walls and distance but unmistakable, and Dante's hand closed around my wrist as he pulled me from the chair. "We are going to the panic room," he said, moving quickly toward the door, and I let him drag me along because my mind had gone blank with terror. Because this was happening again, violence finding me even here in what was supposed to be a fortress, even surrounded by armed guards and security systems and high walls. The hallway outside my room was chaos. Men in suits running with weapons drawn, shouting into earpieces in Italian and English, coordinating responses to an attack that had somehow penetrated defenses that should have been impenetrable. Dante moved through it all with focused intensity, pulling me along, his body positioned to shield me, and we had almost reached a door marked with a red emergency symbol when my mind finally caught up with what was happening. "My mother," I said, pulling against his grip. "She is in the other wing. We cannot leave her." "She is with Helen," Dante said without slowing. "My men will get her to safety. You need to be in the panic room now." But I knew the layout of this house from last night's wandering, knew the medical wing was on the opposite side of the estate, knew that if attackers were inside the perimeter, they could reach my mother before Dante's men could protect her, and I could not hide in a panic room while she was vulnerable and alone. I yanked my hand free from his grip and ran, ignoring his shouted command to stop. my feet carrying me down hallways I barely remembered, past rooms where I could hear fighting, glass shattering, men shouting, and I knew this was stupid and reckless and exactly what he had told me not to do, but she was my mother, and I would not abandon her the way my father had abandoned us. Dante's footsteps pounded behind me and I heard him cursing in Italian, heard him barking orders into his phone, and then he was beside me, his hand gripping my arm again, but this time matching my pace rather than trying to stop me. "Stay behind me," he growled, and there was a gun in his other hand now, held with the same casual competence I had seen yesterday, and we moved together through his house turned battlefield, his body between me and every corner we rounded, every door we passed. The medical wing appeared ahead, and I could see the door to my mother's room standing open, could hear voices inside, and I tried to run faster, but Dante held me back, his grip like iron. "Wait," he said quietly, and he moved ahead of me, weapon raised, approaching the door with careful precision. I followed against his unspoken order, because I could not make myself stay back when my mother was in that room, and I peered around the doorframe to see a scene that made my blood turn to ice. My mother lay in the hospital bed where I had left her last night, still connected to monitors, still barely conscious, and standing beside her with a gun pointed at the oxygen tank was Helen, the kind-faced nurse who had promised to take care of her, who had seemed so professional and trustworthy, who I now understood had been the betrayal, the one who had given the Kozlovs access to the estate. "Please," I said, stepping into the room before Dante could stop me, my hands raised in surrender or supplication. "She is sick. She has nothing to do with this. Please do not hurt her." Helen's eyes met mine, and there was no kindness there now, just cold calculation and desperation. "The key," she said, her voice steady despite the weapon in her hand. "I know you found it. I was listening to the security feeds. I heard everything in the storage room last night. Give me the key now, or I put a bullet in her oxygen tank, and your mother suffocates while you watch." My hand went to my pocket where the key rested, my mind racing through impossible choices, because if I gave her the key, the Kozlovs would have the ledgers and would kill us all anyway. But if I refused, she would make good on her threat, and my mother would die here in this beautiful room that was supposed to keep her safe. Dante moved beside me, his weapon trained on Helen, but she had positioned herself carefully, the bed between us, my mother's fragile body, a shield. "Put the gun down," Dante said, his voice dangerously soft. "You know this ends badly for you, Helen. The estate is surrounded by my men. The Kozlovs cannot extract you. You are already dead. You just have not stopped breathing yet." Helen's hand trembled slightly, but her aim remained steady. "Then I take them with me," she said, nodding toward my mother. "I take this dying woman and her daughter, and you get nothing. No ledgers, no revenge, no closure for what happened to Antonio." She looked at me, her expression almost regretful. "I am sorry, truly. But they have my grandson. The Kozlovs took him 6 months ago, and they will kill him if I do not deliver. So give me the key, and maybe we all survive this." I started to reach into my pocket, my fingers closing around the brass key, my mind screaming that this was wrong but my heart breaking at the thought of my mother gasping for air, and then Dante moved, faster than I could track, his weapon firing twice in quick succession, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Helen dropped, her gun falling from nerveless fingers, and I watched her body crumple to the floor, watched blood bloom across her scrubs, watched the life drain from her eyes, and I could not process what I had just seen, could not reconcile the kind woman from last night with the traitor who had threatened my mother with the corpse now lying on expensive marble flooring. "You killed her," I whispered, the words stupid and obvious but all I could manage, and Dante was already moving past me, checking Helen's body with professional efficiency, kicking her weapon away, securing the threat even though she was clearly beyond threatening anyone. "She would have killed your mother," he said without looking at me, his voice matter-of-fact, practical, as if taking a life was just another task to complete. Do not waste sympathy on people who show you none. They have made their choices, and you cannot save them from the consequences. He straightened and moved to my mother's bedside, checking the monitors, ensuring Helen's gun had not damaged any equipment, and then he was lifting my mother with surprising gentleness, cradling her against his chest the way Marco had done last night, and she made a small, confused sound, but did not wake fully. "The panic room," he said, and I followed numbly as he carried my mother from the room, stepping over Helen's body without a second glance, moving back through hallways where the gunfire had stopped, where his men were securing the estate, where bodies in different clothing lay scattered across floors that had probably never seen violence before. The panic room was exactly what it sounded like, a reinforced space hidden behind a section of wall that swung open at Dante's touch, revealing steel walls and filtered air systems and enough supplies to survive a siege. He settled my mother on a cot inside, adjusting her oxygen, checking her pulse, his hands gentle despite the violence they had just committed, and then he turned to me with those storm-gray eyes that had seen too much death. "Stay here," he said. "The door locks from the inside. You are safe here. I need to finish securing the estate and dealing with the bodies and finding out how many people Helen compromised before I killed her." But he did not leave immediately, just stood there looking at me. And I realized he was waiting for something. Some acknowledgement or reaction or confirmation that I understood what had just happened. "You saved her," I said finally, my voice small in the steel-lined space. "She was going to kill my mother and you saved her." "Of course I did," Dante said, as if the alternative had never been a consideration. "She is yours, which makes her mine to protect. That is how this works, Maya. You are under my protection, and that extends to everything and everyone you care about." I wanted to argue with the possessiveness in his tone, with the casual way he claimed ownership over me, and by extension, my mother. But I was standing in his panic room while his men cleaned up an attack on his estate, while my mother breathed easier than she had in months because of medical equipment he had provided, while the key in my pocket represented a legacy my father had entrusted to his family rather than mine. "You could have let her give them the key," I said, thinking through the choice he had made. "You could have negotiated, traded the ledgers for her grandson, for safe passage, for ending this without more death." Dante's expression hardened, something cold settling over his features. "I do not negotiate with people who betray me," he said, each word precise and final. "Helen made her choice when she let the Kozlovs into my home, when she threatened someone under my protection, when she pointed a weapon at your mother. Her grandson's fate is tragic, but it is not my responsibility, and sacrificing the ledgers to save him would only ensure more grandchildren are taken in the future, more families destroyed, more victims sold into slavery." The calculus was brutal, but I understood it. Understood that he was playing a longer game, that sentiment and mercy were luxuries he could not afford in a world where showing weakness meant death. The sounds of battle had faded outside the panic room, replaced by the organized chaos of cleanup, men shouting orders, vehicles arriving, and through it all my mother slept peacefully, unaware that she had been held at gunpoint, unaware that the nurse she had trusted had been planning to kill her, unaware that Dante Moretti had executed a woman to save her life. I sat on the cot beside my mother and Dante crouched in front of me, his hands finding mine, his touch grounding me when I felt like I was floating away on a tide of shock and adrenaline crash. "You ran toward danger to protect her," he said quietly. "You disobeyed a direct order, you put yourself at risk, and I should be furious with you." He paused, his thumb stroking across my knuckles. "But I understand it. I would have done the same for my father. I have done worse for less important reasons, so I am not angry, just frustrated that you do not yet understand how valuable you are, how much your safety matters." His words wrapped around me like a blanket, warm and confining, and oddly comforting, and I thought about how quickly I had adapted to this new reality, how easily I had accepted his protection and his violence and his casual possessiveness. how completely my life had transformed in less than 24 hours. The key was still in my pocket, my father's final gift and burden, and I knew that retrieving the ledgers would only deepen my entanglement with Dante and his world, would tie me more completely to a future I had not chosen, but was beginning to accept as inevitable. The estate fell silent as dawn broke over walls that had been breached just hours ago, the violence scrubbed away by efficient men who knew how to make death disappear, who had removed bodies and cleaned blood and repaired damaged doors until the only evidence of the attack existed in surveillance footage and memory. I sat in Dante's private study, the same room where he had brought me last night to ask about my father, and I thought about how much had changed in the space of a single rotation of the earth, how completely my understanding of safety and danger and choice had been rewritten. My mother was sleeping again in the medical wing, this time with 4 armed guards stationed outside her door, and new nurses who had been vetted personally by Dante, who had worked for his family for years, and whose loyalty had been tested and proven. Helen's body had been removed along with the Kozlov soldiers who had breached the perimeter, 13 men in total, and I tried not to think about the efficiency with which Dante's organization had cleaned up a small war, tried not to calculate the body count, or wonder where the dead were taken, or how many times this had happened before. Dante entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, real coffee that smelled expensive and foreign, and he set one in front of me before settling into the chair across from his desk, the same position we had occupied last night, though now the dynamic felt different, shifted by violence and revelation, and the key that still rested in my pocket like a brand. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said, his voice quiet in the early morning stillness, "about the ledgers and the safety deposit box and what your choice means going forward." I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup, seeking warmth against a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "Tell me everything," I said. "No more half-truths or strategic omissions. I need to understand exactly what I am choosing." Dante nodded, something like respect flickering in his storm-gray eyes. "The ledgers contain 12 years of detailed records documenting the Kozlov organization's human trafficking operations," he began, each word precise and measured. "Names, dates, transactions, photographs, everything needed to dismantle their entire network and prosecute dozens of people in positions of power. Politicians who took bribes to look the other way, judges who dismissed cases, police officials who provided protection, businessmen who purchased victims, all of it documented in your father's meticulous handwriting." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "With those ledgers I can destroy the Kozlovs completely. I can end a war that has cost dozens of lives including my father's. I can prevent countless future victims from being sold into slavery. But using the ledgers means exposing how we found them, which means you testifying about the piano and the key and your father's note, which means the world knowing you are Vincent Castellano's daughter and the person who delivered the evidence that brought down a criminal empire." The weight of it settled over me like a physical thing, heavy and inescapable. And I understood now why my father had hidden the ledgers so carefully, why he had created such an elaborate system to protect them and me. Once I testified, I would be marked forever, a target for anyone seeking revenge or leverage, anyone who wanted to intimidate witnesses or send a message about the cost of cooperation. "You would be in danger for the rest of your life," Dante continued, reading my thoughts and my expression. "Even with the Kozlovs destroyed, there would be others, associates seeking vengeance, criminals who see making an example of you as beneficial to their interests, opportunists who think kidnapping you might be profitable." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. "So I am offering you a choice, a real choice this time, not one forced by immediate threat, but one you can make with full understanding of the consequences. Take your mother. I will provide new identities for both of you, enough money to live comfortably anywhere in the world, a fresh start in a country where no one knows your name or your connection to any of this. Walk away from me and my world and build whatever life you want, safe and anonymous, and free. The offer should have been tempting, should have been everything I wanted: escape from danger and debt and the crushing weight of my father's legacy. But as Dante spoke, I felt something twist in my chest, some resistance to the idea of walking away, of never seeing him again, of returning to a life of invisibility and struggle, even if that struggle came with safety. "And if I choose to stay?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "What does that look like?" Dante's expression shifted, something dark and possessive sliding behind his carefully controlled features. "Then you belong to me," he said, the words simple but weighted with meaning, completely, without reservation, without the possibility of walking away when things get difficult or dangerous or complicated. "I protect you and your mother. I provide everything you need: medical care and security and a life of comfort you have never known. But in exchange, you become part of my world. You accept the danger that comes with being mine. You trust me to keep you safe, even when that safety requires violence." He stood and moved around the desk, pulling me to my feet, his hands framing my face with unexpected gentleness. "No more cleaning apartments. No more 3 jobs. No more struggling to pay bills or choosing between rent and medication. No more exhaustion or fear or feeling invisible. You would matter, Maya. You would be seen and valued and protected, but you would also be owned, claimed, marked as something that belongs to me in a world where possession is the only real security." I should have been frightened by the possessiveness in his words, should have recognized the red flags in his casual discussion of ownership, but instead I felt something loosen in my chest, some knot of tension I had carried for 12 years unwinding as I considered what he was offering. I had been invisible my entire adult life, just another struggling woman in a city full of them, working multiple jobs and still falling behind, watching my mother die slowly while I was powerless to help. And the idea of being seen, of mattering to someone, of having value beyond my ability to clean or serve or sacrifice, was intoxicating in its simplicity. "I will not pretend this is a fairy tale," Dante continued, his thumb stroking across my cheekbones in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "My world is violent. People will always want to hurt what is mine. Choosing me means choosing danger, means accepting that your safety depends on my power and my willingness to do terrible things to maintain it. Can you live with that? Can you look at me knowing what I have done and will do again and still choose to stay?" I thought about the bodies I had seen him create, about Helen lying dead on marble flooring, about the cold efficiency with which he eliminated threats. And I knew I should be horrified, should be running as far and fast as possible from a man who killed without hesitation or remorse. But I also thought about how he had saved my mother twice, about how he had held me while I cried, about the gentleness in his touch that contrasted so sharply with his capacity for violence, and I realized that the horror and the attraction were not mutually exclusive, that I could acknowledge what he was and still choose him anyway. "I have been in danger my whole life," I said quietly, meeting his storm-gray eyes without flinching. "Just a different kind: poverty and debt and medical crisis, and the constant fear of losing everything, of watching my mother die because I could not afford to save her, of working myself to death and still falling short. At least with you I am not facing it alone. At least the danger comes with protection and resources, and someone who acts like I matter." Dante's grip on my face tightened slightly, possessive and claiming. "You will never be alone again," he said, his voice rough with something that might have been emotion or might have been satisfaction at getting what he wanted. "That is my promise, Maya. You are mine to protect, mine to provide for, mine to care for, mine to possess in every way that matters. You will want for nothing. Your mother will have the best medical care available. You will live in comfort and security, and all I ask in return is your complete surrender, your trust, your belonging." "Yours," I said, the word escaping before I could examine it too closely, before I could analyze whether this was really choice or just the illusion of it, whether I was surrendering or being conquered, or if those were just different words for the same inevitable conclusion. I understand. I am yours. Say it properly, Dante commanded, his voice dropping to that tone that made disobedience feel impossible. And I knew what he wanted, knew what words would seal this bargain we were making in the soft dawn light of his private study. I belong to you, I said, my voice steady and clear, and I watched his pupils dilate, watched satisfaction and possession and something darker slide across his features. Completely, without reservation, I choose to stay. I choose you. I choose this life, even knowing what it means, even understanding the cost. His kiss was claiming and possessive, his mouth on mine with an intensity that stole my breath, one hand sliding into my hair to hold me in place, while the other gripped my waist, pulling me against him until there was no space between us, until I could feel the hard planes of his body and the controlled power he usually kept leashed. This was not a gentle kiss, not a tentative exploration, but a statement of ownership, a physical manifestation of the words I had just spoken, and I surrendered to it, opened for him. Let him take what he wanted because I had just given him permission to take everything. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathing hard, his forehead resting against mine, his hands still holding me, like he was afraid I might disappear if he let go. "Don't move," he murmured, the words echoing across days to that first command in his penthouse. "I will be right back." But this time it was not an order born of emergency, not a desperate attempt to keep me safe during an attack, but a promise, an assurance that he would return, that I was not being abandoned or left behind. He released me and crossed to his desk, pulling out folders and documents I had not noticed before, and when he returned, he spread them on the coffee table for me to see. The first was a deed to a house, not an apartment, but an actual house with a yard and multiple bedrooms, located in a neighborhood I knew by reputation as safe and expensive and far beyond anything I could have afforded in multiple lifetimes of working 3 jobs. "For your mother," Dante said, watching my face as I processed what I was seeing. Round-the-clock nursing care, a fully equipped medical suite, everything she needs to be comfortable for however long she has left, and when she passes, it becomes yours. A place to remember her, a sanctuary if you ever need space from my world. The second document was a credit card, black and heavy, with my name embossed on it and no credit limit listed. "For you," he said simply. "Buy whatever you want, go wherever you want. I will never question your spending or restrict your access. You are not a prisoner or a dependent, but a partner who has resources at her disposal." The third was more complicated, legal documents that I had to read twice to understand, papers that named me as a consultant to his various legitimate businesses, a position that came with a salary that made my head spin, and benefits that included health insurance and retirement accounts, and things I had stopped dreaming about years ago. "So the world has an explanation for your presence in my life," Dante explained. "So you have legitimate income and legal standing, and a role that makes sense to outside observers, even though we both know the truth is more complicated." I stared at the documents, at the tangible proof of what belonging to him meant, and I thought about how quickly he had assembled all of this, how prepared he had been for my choice, and I wondered if he had ever really believed I would choose to leave, or if this outcome had been inevitable from the moment he locked me in his study with a command and a promise. "What am I to you?" I asked, looking up from the papers spread across his coffee table. "The documents say consultant. The world will probably assume mistress or girlfriend or some combination thereof, but what is the truth? What do you call me in your own mind?" Dante pulled me to my feet again, his hands finding my waist, his expression serious. "Mine," he said simply. "That is the only label that matters. You are mine in every way that counts, under my protection and my care and my possession. And whatever else the world wants to call you is irrelevant because they do not understand what we have, what you have chosen, what belonging to me truly means. The ambiguity should have bothered me, should have made me demand clarity and defined roles and concrete expectations, but instead I found it oddly freeing. The lack of labels, the simple claim of possession that encompassed everything without limiting it to categories that did not quite fit. We retrieved the ledgers that afternoon, Dante and I and a security team that could have invaded a small country, driving to a bank in the financial district where my fingerprint and the key opened a safety deposit box that had sat undisturbed for 12 years. The ledgers were exactly as Dante had described, meticulous records in my father's handwriting, documenting horrors I could barely comprehend, and I handed them over to Dante knowing that I had just given him the weapon he needed to end his war with the Kozlovs, to avenge his father, to prevent countless future victims from suffering the same fate as those documented in these pages. The penthouse looked different when we returned to it at sunset. The city spread out below bathed in golden light, and I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows in that familiar study where everything had started and thought about the woman I had been yesterday morning. The cleaning woman with 3 jobs and crushing debt and a dying mother and no hope for anything better. That woman was gone, erased as completely as the violence that had occurred in these rooms, replaced by someone new, someone who belonged to a dangerous man and his dangerous world, someone who had traded independence for security and struggle for comfort and invisibility for being possessed. Dante's arm came around my waist from behind, pulling me back against his chest, his chin resting on top of my head as we looked out over the city together. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. And I thought about my mother sleeping peacefully in a house designed for her comfort, about the credit card in my wallet and the salary I would never have to earn through exhaustion, about the way his presence made me feel safe and seen and valued in ways I had forgotten were possible. "None," I said, and meant it because whatever else. This was, whatever darkness lurked beneath the surface of his protection and possession. It was also rescue from a slow drowning I had been enduring for 12 years, and I was pragmatic enough to choose a dangerous future over a hopeless present. The key sat on his desk now, its purpose served, my father's final gift delivered, and I thought about trust Dante like I trusted Antonio and realized that my father had been right, had known that someday his daughter would need the kind of protection only the Moretti family could provide, had planned for this moment when I would stand in this study belonging to his best friend's son and choose to stay rather than run. "I came here as a maid," I said, my voice quiet in the gathering dusk. "Just someone hired to clean your study, and now I am something else entirely, and I do not even know what to call it." "You are mine," Dante said, his arms tightening around me, his voice certain and final. "That is what you call it. That is all you need to call it. And everything else will follow from that simple truth." The city lights began to flicker on below us, thousands of lives being lived in ignorance of the violence and danger, and strange bargains being struck 40 stories above their heads. And I leaned back into Dante's embrace and accepted that this was my life now. This man and his world, and the protection and possession that came with choosing to belong to him. "Don't move," he had said that first day, and I had obeyed, had stayed behind his desk while gunfire raged, and now I understood that the command had been the beginning of something, the first step in a dance that had led inevitably to this moment, to this choice, to this surrender that felt less like defeat and more like finally stopping fighting against currents I could never have resisted anyway. I stayed, and in staying I became his. And in becoming his, I found a strange kind of freedom, the liberation that comes from surrendering the burden of struggling alone, from trusting someone else to carry the weight I had been bearing for too long, from believing that his promise to protect me was worth the cost of belonging to him completely.